Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Work Cookie, our weekly gathering for IOs, HR, recruiters, and one actor, as we gather to talk about how to make work life a little bit better. And Jeremy, today you've chosen a topic that it's coming up more and more as we continue down this path of the way that the world of work is changing. And that's really the focus on leadership, especially when it's coming to that move that a lot of organizations are making from completely co-located to either hybrid or remote. That role of leadership is really changing. And, from what I'm seeing out there, that role of manager is really becoming a leadership role in a way that's quite different than it was 20 years ago.
It is. And the interesting thing is when you look at the research on different types of power, we're still, which is not bad. The theories that are from, 50 years ago, when you're looking at, referent power and all these other types of power, they still apply. And the neat thing is you can find studies that are now looking at them in different ways. One of the, I'll share today is a model of looking at gossip in the workplace and how gossip, whether it's positive or negative, can influence whether someone has positive or negative power, whether it be coercive, expert, referent, reward power. And it's interesting because Tom, you and I, we were on that event. We were talking about basically internal systems for employee communication. And it got me thinking about that too, because you look at the, how gossip can also shape workplace culture. So I'll share a little bit of that for today. And there's another thing. There was a scale that was developed. It was when you look at physicians and the implementation of technology, where they're having to where they're having to write in and type in all the the data on the patients. So some physicians would see that as a reduction of power, for example, because now they're doing what they may see as maybe administrative work. So then that caused some people in that healthcare industry to look at, all right, can we actually create a scale to try to find out what type of power somebody in the workplace thinks they have? So I'll be pulling that up too. But it's interesting because some of the questions are, at my work I have, and you have, your low to high scale, either opportunities or nowhere to go, knowledge or ignorance, authority or no authority. And what comes out of that is you can start to identify what kind of power one perceives themselves to have, because it's self-report data. Now I was thinking too that could be interesting to use in addition with a like a leadership 360 report. Because yes, a 360 will provide what they think on those other things, but rarely do you see something as specific as nailing it down to what kind of power they see that they have. So there's a lot of fun ways that we can take it, and I'll start to pull up these examples on the screen share, and I'll also share in the chat a file, and I'll look to someone else on the panel to take it from here while I do that. Tom, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, just before you start doing that research, Jeremy, one thing you said sort of clicked in my head, and that was, that old phrase of to gain power, you have to give power away. As we develop this new work paradigm, Sharon McLean is talking about, the fourth industrial revolution that we're in right now. Is that becoming more of a truism that really and truly in today's work world, if you want to increase your power, you need to give power away?
I think it's a combination of power and trust, which both lead to extreme vulnerability, which leads to people not wanting to do it, which makes total sense. And that comes from, you look at, I believe you look at Kouzes and Posner's research on the five main factors that are seen globally as the factors that people look for in a leader. And of course, their resulting book with multiple editions of the Leadership Challenge, which also resulted in an assessment called the LPI, which is the Leadership Practices Inventory. But yes, that's where, they brought up the paradox of power. In order to become powerful, you have to give power away. Again, ooh, ouch, it doesn't feel good, vulnerability, and then also the trusting aspect. And on that note, because I have a visual reminder here today, this is our 100th episode, which is so cool. And Linda Ann has just made it the day. She has balloons. So if you're on the podcast, you gotta start coming to these events, because Linda has all these colorful balloons hanging in the backdrop of her video today in celebration of our 100th episode. And they're moving around. Look at that.
Hey,
Tom, over to you.
Well, happy 100, everyone, and thank you to everyone who's taken this journey with us, including Lee. Let's go to you, Lee.
Well, Tom, first thing I want to say is it's very auspicious that our 100th episode happens on International Coffee Day. I'm just going to put that out there. One thing that I've noticed in the workplace, especially dealing with some of the younger workers who were raised very differently than, their elders, is quiet power. So, it kind of goes along with the giving power away. Part of your power is to convince them that they want to do it. I think it was Winston Churchill that said, diplomacy is a way of telling someone to go to hell that makes them look forward to the trip. So what you do is you get them to want to do what it is you wanted to do, and you can give them give more information. We have to give more information than we used to. And I did this with my own children when they were younger. They would want to do something I didn't want them to do. And I'd say, okay, well, you can do that, but this will be the consequence. You can choose to do what I told you to do, or you can choose to have this consequence. And then, of course, being children, they would do it. They would get the consequence, and then they would, and I'm like, well, you chose this. This was your choice. And, and after a while, they kind of figured that out, because kids are hard-headed, and it took them a little while. And eventually they went, maybe that consequence is not as worth what I think the fun is going to be here. And so sometimes with your employees, you have to go, okay, you can do things other than what I'm telling you to do, but this is going to be the consequence of that. If it's great, fantastic. I'll run up the flagpole and sing your praises. If it doesn't, you're going to be held accountable for, whatever mayhem you have caused. And, to try to get people to really think through that. And really when you're working with people above you, that kind of goes back to making them think it was their idea.
Right.
So if you can phrase it in a way that it's a we thing, and then all of a sudden they're like, I've got a great idea. You're like, that's fantastic. That's the best idea I've heard all day. You have used your quiet power to get them to do exactly what you wanted them to do. Not in a manipulative way, but in a way that, you're sharing the wealth, as it were, sharing the power.
Right.
Lee, if I may add to that. So right on that note, something that it was a military general I was talking with once was speaking to me, and whether it was, I think it was a combination of his subordinates and also his kids along that perspective. When it comes, especially with kids, when we're trying to keep them safe, the way it was phrased, which I remember, and I always find it interesting, is you have a set of choices, and based on the choice that you make, I have a set of choices. So it's a neat way of putting that into perspective, saying you can make it. Almost gives them a little bit more of accountability, but it adds that autonomy too, knowing that they still have the ability to make whatever choice they want. But I also have to realize that this other person who sets the rules can make the choice based on what I make. So it starts to help them understand more of a cause and effect relationship than just a coercive type of relationship. So thanks for bringing that thought forward, Lee.
I totally agree with that. And I noticed with a lot of my juniors, especially the really younger ones, when I explain to them that it wasn't just because I told you so. There are actual rules and regulations in play, and that you are causing certain things by your actions. They tended to be a lot more received because they understood it wasn't just my opinion saying I don't like that. There were actual repercussions that they were forcing upon themselves.
Yeah, great point. Dr. Martha, let's go to you.
One of the things that when we talk about giving away power or empowerment, if you will, we tend to think about the supervisor or the manager in question and his or her subordinates. And that tends to be the picture that we look at. But there's so much more to that picture, because there are most likely people above that manager. And whether or not that manager feels safe in the environment of those above him or her in empowering others or giving power away, because there is such a thing as a concern that if I give my power away, I make myself obsolete. And in certain organizations, that could very well be true. So it's not just about that manager and his or her team. It's also about who is above that manager and what kind of experience they provide to that manager. Do they allow him or her to be safe? The other point that I wanted to bring up, this discussion is making me think of a book that's titled Power versus Force, and that's by Dr. David Hawkins. And he tells the story or explains the difference between power versus force. And one of the best examples that sticks out for me from that book is a comparison between Gandhi, who had power, and the British Empire, who had force. Without the army and the guns, the British Empire had nothing. And here was this man who had no guns, no violence, no desire for violence, and look at the power that he had. So it's so important that when we look at organizations and we look at managers, we keep that in mind, because there are those people in management who are more about force than power.
Right.
So that's a whole different take on that topic then at that point.
Well, let me turn that on its head a little bit, because you talk about the various levels in the organization, and the term of the week is quiet quitting. Are these people reclaiming power? Can we describe it that way? And is that kind of what's going on?
Well, I think that's reclaiming personal power. I think maybe not necessarily your power in the workplace. If quiet quitting means actually leaving or checking out while staying there, then I would say it's a form of personal power, not necessarily gaining any kind of power within the organization at that point. But certainly there's something to be considered there. It's not, I don't think it's that different from this mass exodus that we've seen, the Great Resignation, whether you leave physically or whether you collect the paycheck, but you're totally checked out. That didn't happen overnight, and that didn't happen for no reason.
Very, very true. And it's going to be interesting to see where that goes. Dr. Oriana, let's go to you.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, based on the list that many of us learned in grad school and that Dr. Jeremy just put up, when we look at this list, what stands out to me is I think the last century has been maybe an over-indexing on legitimate power in the workplace, where people use their positional authority and kind of do it almost in that parenting style. I know you guys were getting at different concepts earlier, but like, I am the authority and you'll do as I say, kind of a mentality. But I think I think it relates to the quiet quitting, because I think that there have been a number of abuses of power in the workplace. And sometimes it's a whole chain, right? As Dr. Martha was saying, where the most toxic leader starts at the top, and then no leader down the whole chain has that sense of psychological safety or trust. But I think we're seeing a move right now in our zeitgeist of the 20th century where we are, moving to more of the referential power, and almost that power almost held at the organization level. What are the values we care about? What are we about? How is this meaningful? And how do we draw people in on that? But it also, I think we've talked about this many, many episodes now, it takes another effort from leaders, and it takes care, and it takes caring about the individual and getting to know your team and putting in that effort. So I definitely see this shift. And now I think that people are no longer willing to just do whatever because their leader says so. And I think that's where we see people taking back their personal power.
Speaking of that leadership, there's a transition going on, and some leaders are well advanced in the curve of changing the culture in the organization more to the model you're talking about. But there are still those people who are hanging on to those old paradigms. What's going to happen to those people if they don't make the shift?
Well, Tom, I feel like you always ask this question, but I feel like you're just going to get the worst outcomes, right? Your teams are going to be less effective. You're going to have higher turnover. But I also, since I did a lot of leadership consulting to the construction industry, I've seen that these leaders need our help too. So I think that we need to consider everyone and give them leadership training and help them. And I've seen a lot of traditional oriented leaders have a lot of light bulb moments that they could then bring back to the workplace. So hopefully we can kind of bring everyone up in this positive transition toward focusing on people, meaning, and values.
Yeah, we got to get him in the room first. We got to have that conversation. Nick, welcome to the stage. You want to unmute your mic and join us?
Good morning. As we kind of talk about some of this, I think of, how leadership has to change when you get more kind of flattened out organizations where you don't see just the traditional hierarchy. And so leadership is less about, kind of power and authority and more about that sort of influence. Do you influence the culture, the ideas, things like that? Everybody in the room should have that same common goal to get the work done. But when you don't have, A reports to B, reports to C as much anymore, in most cases, how does that change what you have to do? And I think it does speak to that. Okay, I have to care about the entirety of the employee. Why are they collecting a paycheck? Are they just here for the money? Did they join up because they care about the vision, or because it was the hot new name in tech or whatnot to really kind of advance their career? And understanding those motivations in order to get the best for and out of the people that they work with.
Let me ask you this, because I had a chat with Liam Martin a couple of months ago, and he talked about the democratization of work. And is that causing this sort of leveling of the playing field where, power is maybe shared more?
I think so. And just the amount of tools and avenues to which, employees have to, go find a job at the competitor or go strike off on their own, they're not as trapped as they once were, even though, you get these people talking about quiet quitting that sounds like, well, I hate it here, but I'm going to stay anyway because the alternative is worse. But I think there are those freedoms, and it does level the playing field. And I think there is kind of some understanding of how do you get through that power struggle. And again, I think it does help to have more of that compassionate view of the total employee rather than, what do they do from 9 to 5?
Yeah, I agree. Linda Ann, let's go to you. And your balloons.
I love balloons. I have a couple things. One, I think that sort of on the vein of where Nick was going, I think there's healthy power and unhealthy power, and for the most part, it's the people in your environment that decides who has power, real power, and it's only the healthy kind of power that you can give away, right? You can't give away coercive power or authoritarian power, those kinds of things. And one of my favorite sayings as I was promoted in different situations was that, management or leadership is the illusion of power and the opportunity to work as much as possible, So I think it's a pretty fleeting or thing that it's hard to quantify or put your hands around. But people will choose who they're going to follow or who they're going to give that power to, regardless of what your title is or what position you hold or anything like that. And so I think that we need to figure out how people understand how to utilize their power effectively. You know, if they're determined to have it, if they believe they have it, how do they effectively use it, and what's the tools for that process?
I worked in an organization where the administrative assistant ran the office, and we all loved it because it worked incredibly well. Nobody knows what's going on in the office better than those people. Jeremy, sorry to make you wait. It's up to you.
So Ludmila is here, and I love saying this. It's completely my mistake for providing the wrong Zoom link or a link without a password or whatever I did, but I completely did that. And she was sending me a message on the back saying I can't get it. So I finally gave Dr. Ludmila Preslova what she needs. So she is here. And I mentioned, and I put the link in the chat for the article that she wrote. That can be found on fastcompany.com, although we were just made aware that that particular site has been down, but we'll make sure in the podcast, when you look on the description, you'll be able to easily click on that link to review that particular article, to type more on the types of leadership in the workplace. So Tom, I'll turn it back over to you, and we'll get Ludmila in whenever you are ready, Mr. Tom Bradshaw.
All right, let me see. Let's go to Dr. Martha first, and then Dr. Ludmila will come to you. Dr. Martha.
It seems like so many different topics that we discuss, whether here or in other places, it keeps coming back to the importance of an organization's culture. If the culture does not promote or allow something, whatever the topic is, then it's that much more difficult to make it into a reality. You can have one or two managers who are all about sharing power and empowering others, but if the culture is such that that is not to be done, then it will fizzle away, because there will be things that are said or things that are done or barriers that are placed that will put an end to it. So companies' culture is so important for so many different topics that we discuss. I want to make sure that I bring that up.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that can link us into Dr. Ludmila, because I'm really interested to sort of discover what are the various types of power or power structure that you're seeing out there in various organizations.
Well, it's definitely such a huge question, and we can obviously start in many different places. By the way, whatever I got out from your conversation was really great, and people already started with a lot of great examples and tying it to quiet quitting. But really, a lot of people quit, resign, do various things because they do not feel welcomed within their organizations. And very often it is because they don't have autonomy. They're not treated as adults, because for a very long time, all those types of power that would fall under command and control have been the predominant tool in many workplaces. So it will dangle a carrot in front of your nose, and then I'm going to basically cheat on with a big club. And that is like, okay, now I'm the boss. And again, that is probably has gotten organizations as far as it possibly could, because with the type of jobs that people have now, with realizations that people have made during the pandemic, how short is life, and how not fun it is to waste it in the environments where you're not respected and treated with dignity. It is likely that people are going to be less and less likely to stay in those kinds of organizations. And yes, I see the moral injury, which would be another article that's not working on Fast Company, but I do have a couple of on HBR on moral injury that should be working. But definitely when people are also encountering cultures that are internally abusive, when managers who come in with a good will and are trying to do their best, but their bosses are not allowing them to treat people right, you're going to have moral injury. And when you know that your culture is, your organization is abusing clients or patients, if you're in healthcare, whatever kind of organization is, you're not living up to your mission, there's definitely a huge potential for moral injury as well. It doesn't have to be, we can do better, but yes, there are a few deeply rooted issues with even some management training that people are taught things, unfortunately, still in business schools. They're very bad organizational psychology. Okay, I see Jeremy's hand. So let's see what he has, but then I'm happy to talk about something else.
Great. Jeremy, let's go to you.
Yeah, thanks. I'm trying to look at all my screens here. So I have up, and my question, Ludmila, is going to be, is there, we have what we think in most situations, kind of an overall, this is the best type of power. And we all have our own tendencies as well. And are there different types of power, I guess, maybe for different situations where normally we would say, no, that particular type of power we shouldn't do that. But are there any things that you can think of where there's an exception to the rule? And for those listening to the podcast, what I have up here, we have French and Raven's 6 Bases of Social Power, which has been for, decades. It's the kind of the go-to. It's where you hear, you've got informational power, expert power, referent power, legitimate power, and reward and coercive power. And when you look at, so what I have actually up, just for a little context for those that are here right now, this is what was used in the development of that scale for physicians, but really for anybody to help determine what kind of power they think that they have. And these are the words that they found in terms of that represented those types. So Ludmila, I was wondering, maybe you can give us, and especially for the listeners of the podcast, could you go down and just explain a little bit about each of these 6 types maybe, and then what do you think about each of these 6 types, meaning informational, expert, referent, legitimate, and reward and coercive? And also, of course, this is older research, any new terms that you think have hit the have hit the stage in the recent years that might combine or help us better understand?
Sure. Actually, I don't want to go down the list. I want to go up the list, because the way they are arranged in this table, it actually starts with the most, basic and in some ways primitive ways of power use, and it ends with the more sophisticated influence. So I'm going to start with reward and coercive, which we kind of already mentioned. So dangle bonuses. I'm sorry, we're just having the worst of luck. I'm sick. Fast Company website is down. Zoom wasn't working, but we're just going to keep flagging through that. So reward and coercive power is what you would usually associate with you are going to do this or you're going to get punished. You want to have a job, do as I say. And if you do as I say really well, then maybe you'll get a raise. So that is very typical. And obviously, we do need rewards. It is grounded in our basic human needs, in that people want to need basic security in life, and sometimes we do work just because we need to work, and we hope for those rewards. Nobody's kind of there for punishments, but people sometimes do take jobs for rewards, and in giving honest days work, they expect to get honest days pay. So there's nothing inherently wrong with that. but this is not going to create the highest levels of engagement or highest level of creativity for the most part. Usually you would want to appeal to other types of motives. So appropriate use of rewards, is necessary because we don't necessarily want to work for free and we want to be acknowledged, but it's just not necessarily enough to maximize the relationship. And the next legitimate part, is based on the formal position. So I am able to do that because I'm a boss. I'm telling you what to do because I'm a parent. That's kind of the same logic. I don't have to really explain what I'm doing because I have legitimate authority for making those requirements, for making those demands, for outlining those goals. Again, everything is okay in moderation. There's like no such thing as evil power or good power. It's neutral power and ability to make change, but how it's used, that's a problem. Sometimes we need legitimate authority. Sometimes people are thrown into situations where they're told to do something, but they lack legitimate authority. And some of us can pull it off and do it anyway because we compensate with extra effort to create extra referent or informational influence. But it's not how it should work. In organizations, we should be positioned appropriately to do our jobs. The problem with legitimate power is that people tend to abuse it and say, oh, got legitimate power, then that's all I need. I don't have to be respected. I don't date my knowledge. I don't have to be treated well. I'm owed reverence just because I'm in this position. So that is a problem when people take legitimate power too far. And then we get into those more of inspirational types of power, where we're talking about referent type of power. I want to be like you. You're such a good leader. I want to be you when I grow up. And I'm just going to do those things because you inspire me. You want me to belong to your team. I derived pride and joy from being on your team. So that, again, is wonderful. But again, you can't imagine taking it so far that people just kind of stop any kind of critical thinking and identify with a leader to the point where it gets to the, not a good charismatic leader. So you can't take everything to the extreme where it becomes a problem, but for the most part, we want to have referent power as well as expert power. I earned my knowledge. I have a lot of experience. And my specialized knowledge gives me a little bit more weight than someone who maybe, read 2 articles on the topic versus if I've been doing this for 30 years. So you do use expert power and it can create a lot of positive because you're not reinventing the wheel. You know what's happening. You are able to use knowledge to recombine it in new ways to inform creativity. You could take it again a little bit too far to become a little bit too rigid, but not necessarily, as long as you still have the learning attitude. And the final one is very interesting. So when French and Raven designed the original version of the model, Raven wanted to add informational power, but French didn't agree. French thought that that it's more of an influence, but not necessarily a power in itself. But Raven later included it in all the different variations, and he was very committed to informational power. And then it was taken a little bit further to understand that it's a power that actually stays with people. So you help to understand why something is the best. You are giving people reasons for action, and then you can just kind of step back, and when people understand the reason for action, they're just going to carry it over. They may not even remember they got this influence from you, but it is important to them. So informational influence is something that I see personally now in thought leadership, especially with remote thought leadership. I can follow someone in Australia because I think they're just have this brilliant approach to doing things in the workplace. Or I can follow someone in Norway. So they don't have to be physically present. They don't have to have any kind of formal authority over me, but they can influence how I think and my decisions because they're not, because of the kind of thinking they provide. So what I believe in the current situation, most organizations need to teach their leaders is how to influence at a distance, because if you put people into one place and stand over their head with a big club, it's pretty easy to be a boss. Now, if you are trying to influence people from far away, remotely, and you want to inspire them from far away, you have to be functioning much more like a thought leader than a traditional boss in the workplace. So if we want modern organization, if we want work from home to work, if we want the future of work in which people have a lot of autonomy and work is getting done, then we need to rely more on expert informational and referent power. But yes, there are exceptions, and we probably all have occasionally worked with people who are not in that particular place in their life yet, and they are their boss. Why would they even listen to you? So there are occasional situations when formal authority, reward authority, and coercive authority is needed. I would use it as a last resort when I see an individual who is not responding to a referent informational or expert power. However, the problem is if that is used as a default with everyone, assuming none of us are intrinsically motivated and only respond to the club. So that kind of creates a problematic situation. But yes, it's important for leaders to also sometimes understand that each individual might need a different mix of approaches to how you work with them. That was a very long answer. Jeremy, you're muted. I think you're saying something, but you're muted.
Tom, you're muted.
Not anymore. Dr. Ludmila, I wanted to ask you, what is it like in the situation of talking to leadership and telling them they have to change their leadership style? Is that an easy conversation to have?
No, obviously, and I think you know the answer. And my area is diversity and inclusion. I've been in diversity and inclusion for longer than I'm willing to acknowledge, but yeah, since the 90s. So take an area where you need to get people to start to think differently. So it's very difficult. And obviously, if you tell someone, you know, you've been doing this wrong for 20 years, they're going to take it very well. So again, you want to give them some examples. You want to give them some information. This is how this company has done it. Here's a case study. That's how they've been doing it, and results were not so good. And now they're doing it in this way, and their inclusion numbers, their retention, all the desired outcomes are much better. So again, you can even apply the same framework to how you talk to those people. Nobody wants someone to come to them and tell them, you know what, you don't know what you're doing, and you have to change. Internal person is probably not going to do too well attempting that. And, if you're a consultant, you probably might not necessarily be asked back. So again, expert power, trying to explain and teach, trying to model. If you are an internal person, especially, and they observe you working, that you could model a little bit more and develop more of a referent power, or even just provide examples from your life. And informational power definitely works much better when you are trying to get change on this level. And examples, humans do to examples, and humans do respond to stories, but those stories need to be real, because if you keep faking, they're going to catch you.
Not if you're a well-trained actor. That's all. Let me ask you the question again, but maybe in a little bit of a different way, because I'm wondering, employees themselves have changed, especially coming through the pandemic. We're all now much more concerned about work-life balance. So what kind of leadership are employees attracted or drawn to? If I want to, build those people who follow me, what type of leadership are they looking for that really gets them going so they have a greater buy-in?
Well, we keep hearing about empathy. And even before the pandemic, a lot of people said that they would quit and leave if they could find a more empathetic leader. It is something that we see even more now. So people are looking for empathy. Their definitions of empathy are slightly different. Some people want someone who will just, understand everything about my situation and maybe give me some slack, but I don't think that's kind of how it was meant to be. I think it's someone who will help us develop in ways we want to develop, and that you hear that many people want leaders to be mentors. They say especially Gen Zs and younger millennials, but I would argue that anyone could use a good mentor that could have this referent and informational influence on us. And there are definitely other things that we all want, but we generally want someone who is competent and who is going to treat you well. That really hasn't changed because it's human nature, but it's an intensity and urgency with which we now realize that this is just really, really important. Life is short, and a bad boss can ruin a big chunk of it. So we're really looking for people who are ethical and for people who know what they're doing.
Let me ask you this as well, because I was having a great conversation yesterday with Trip Braden about psychological safety in the workplace, and especially when it comes to inclusion. So how is that reshaping or changing the work environment?
Very much so, because you can't have inclusion without psychological safety. And that is one issue where traditional diversity inclusion programs fall short, because you can get numerical diversity if you try really hard, but you're not going to have inclusion without psychological safety. You're definitely not going to have belonging without psychological safety, because people need to be able to participate and feel like they can actually bring themselves to work and not to pretend to be someone else. And the ability to contribute to conversation, to actually share all those opinions and experiences that come from us, coming from different backgrounds, to actually realize benefits of diversity. It only is going to happen if people feel like their voice is actually welcomed and appreciated, and not just given a lip service, but really no, we don't want to hear from you. So we definitely want to create psychological safety, because without it, inclusion is just not going to happen in our workplaces.
Right. Well, maybe here's the hard question, and then I'll give you a bit of a break, and we'll go to some other speakers. But is there buy-in? I mean, are organizations seeing this as inevitable, and the quicker we get on the path, the better it's going to be for us? Or are there still leadership who is hesitant? What's the real story out there? Yeah? Is it a 50-50 split right now, or are we seeing momentum in one direction?
It kind of depends on the industry. Some industries that traditionally had kind of a lot of entrenched power, or have very strong bro culture that's been there for a very long time, really don't want to, do something different. And there are industries that are a little bit more open, but even within the same industry, you get people who say, you know what do you want from me? You want a particular number? Just tell me what number you want. I'll try to produce it somehow. But they really do not think it through, and they have not internalized the value of actually different opinions and different ways of thinking. And then there are obviously companies that are all in and definitely want to do something different, or there are incredible startups that actually created specifically to be inclusive and designed to be inclusive. But then there are some older organizations that are doing some pretty good job. Nobody's perfect. Like Walgreens is winning a lot of awards for their inclusion, but Walgreens is not perfect, and they have things to work on. And the same to say for other companies. Some are doing very well with neurodiversity inclusion, which hardly anyone does well, but they're ageist. So it's also it's very granular. There are some people who will say, yeah, we're all in and we're doing stuff about gender. Then you ask them about disability and then they're like, what are you talking about? So it's not just one thing. Rather, there are also people who might have accepted a very specific agenda within diversity, but not a broader perspective that there are multiple variables in there as well.
Right. Dr. Martha, I'd like to go to you and ask sort of the same question. Are you seeing organizations willing to make this change, and how do they get started?
Well, I think oftentimes organizations get started because something prompts them, be that an event or situation or a lawsuit, perhaps. It's so interesting that change can be so slow for so many, because it's human nature to get comfortable in the way we've always done things, and change requires time and effort. And when we're talking about organizations, mostly, we're looking at profit. What is the bottom line? And if I go through the trouble of making this change, taking the time and the effort, which all translates into money, what will be the payoff for my organization in the end? And so you have people like me, and I look at diversity as a no-brainer. The more diverse a group is, the more diverse your ideas, the more strengths and talent you have. But when you talk to an organization, they look at that and say, well, that's nice on paper, but Can you guarantee me some kind of results? What am I going to get in 30 days here? So I think because humanity tends to get stuck in its comfortable spots, it can be difficult to get the change started. And unfortunately, there's sometimes it's an event that prompts the change. We know that the pandemic prompted all kinds of changes for organizations. If the pandemic would not have happened, would those changes happen? Probably not for most of them. The working remotely idea was not new before the pandemic, and there were many companies who had tried it, but there were also many companies who had tried it and then decided not to continue with it, brought everybody back to the office. And that was way before the pandemic. Well, we tried it, we didn't get millions of dollars as a result, so let's just go back to the way we used to do things. So it always goes back to, what's your motivation for this change? How painful is it to not change? And what's the payoff to change? So it will vary by organization, it will vary by industry, and it will vary by leader. The people at the very top, whoever has the final word, can often trump anybody else's reasoning. So that comes into play too. So again, a lot of different variables come into play here. I think change has to happen over time, because the only constant in the universe is change. Otherwise, we'd still be living in caves. So change does happen over time, but it doesn't always happen as quickly as we would like it to.
Very true. Linda, let's go to you.
I think one of the challenges that we face is that when we're talking about these topics, how it's implemented and applied in the work world, in the workforce, is that a lot of leadership isn't even aware of this stuff existing. And, it's our headspace, right? We live in this world. But it's like, if I went ahead and tried to structurally engineer a building, I wouldn't even know where to start. And so I think that we need to make sure that we're educating first before we're expecting change, because I think that a lot of leadership is not even remotely aware of some of these issues or the information related to them.
How are they missing it? I mean, in my world, it's out there everywhere. So how is leadership missing this?
I think their priorities are elsewhere. We have to be sure that we're speaking their language so that they can hear us.
Right. So yeah, let's use the same language. We're down to just a couple of minutes left, and Nick and Amanda, I want to get you both in. So Nick, let's go to you first.
The one thing that kept coming to mind is we talk about, the basis of power and the person in authority. And for me, it is a two-way street, because the employee, the under, has to submit to that authority as well. Right. If you think of, I have a physical safety because somebody's standing over me with a club, that's a form of submission. So I'd be interested to hear any thoughts or discussion on what does submission to these different bases of power look like. And, submission is a very kind of power-driven word, but, kind of that idea of coercion versus influence or anything like that, kind of some of those ideas coming out.
Yeah, it sounds like another great topic for another show, Jeremy. Amanda, let's go to you.
So your question of why earlier ended up bringing back some of the items that Dr. Martha ended up bringing up about what has brought in within their circle of awareness. Leaders have got so much on their bandwidth that you're lucky to grab a 15-minute cup of coffee with them as they're walking from one meeting to another, because their calendars are jam-packed. They've got folks that are managing their calendars for them and telling them where they need to be during the day so that they are there on time. And it gets to the point of trying to find the way in which to speak it to them in their language, which is often, well, what is the impact of the business value of transitioning the leadership from one area to another? Because a lot of the conversation I'm hearing that's coming about keeps resonating content I read from Bass's Handbook of Leadership. If you want a solid summarized area on the leadership studies area, check out Bass's Handbook of Leadership. It's freaking awesome, but you will probably be drinking out of a fire hose. But it's really trying to get their buy-in to understand that we're all human, and for followership to actually volunteer themselves, we're human, so we need to see their humanity. And that gets back to that empathy portion, and that transformational leadership is so vital for that.
Yeah, it certainly is. Dr. Ludmila, let's go back to you, and then Jeremy, I'm going to come to you for the wrap up.
Okay, I was just telling someone to stay safe in the hurricane because apparently someone is in the zone of hurricanes. But I wanted to quickly visit the next question about submission, even though the better term for submission is followership, which is a whole other huge area of study. But yes, the way people react to power and those who are in authority positions is a very important variable. And what we want is a willing followership rather than obviously just scared person who is doing frantically something just not to get punished, because you will not get the best creativity or innovation in that way. You want people who are there because they want to be, like in any kind of situation. Anytime you try to force people to do something, results are never going to be as good as if they were there wholeheartedly.
Yeah. And Jeremy, that reminds me of, something that you've often said of, there's lots of books on leadership. There's no books, really good ones, on followership. Jeremy, final thoughts for the day?
Yes, and Tom, if you have a hard stop right now, I can run it out. I don't know if you do or not. Beautiful discussion as always. 3 things. Lee has virtual, it's in the chat for the link, a virtual IO networking event next Wednesday evening. You can also check him out on LinkedIn. He's got a post on there up about that. And Lee also does some really cool pop-up events. Next, Holly, can you speak briefly on what you have posted and how can people know and learn and about, I can't pull it up. Help me out, Holly. High performance paradox. Go for it.
Yes, the high performance paradox. So a lot of us here look at human performance and lots of different factors, and we know that a drive to achieve isn't always enough to ensure consistent high level performance. So I have partnered with my partner, Jamie Torchiana from Exemplary Performance, and we're looking at this conundrum, and we're titling it The Performance Paradox: Why Suboptimal Performances Happen to Great Performers and How to Stack the Odds in Your Favor. We're looking at a 6-factor model, 3 factors external to the individual, 3 factors internal to the individual, kind of a really heavy hitting session. And we're paralleling high performance in business and organizations and elite athletics. Fun fact, I'm a former professional athlete. So I think that this would be up, the alley of the group here. So I'm just going to drop the link. If anybody wants to show up or sign up, we have a high performance insight guide that we're going to be sharing with all registered attendees, but we'd love to see you there. That's all. Thank you.
Yes, and I was going to mention that. So anyone interested in sports psychology, there's going to be plenty of hints of that in there too. So lots on performance from the lens of sports. So that's exciting. So thank you for sharing, Holly. And the information is in the chat. And lastly, we've got some interesting themes coming up for the next couple months. You all know Dr. Destiny Preet is amazing at getting the engagement going and the conversations going on LinkedIn. So we've been working on this media calendar, and she just came up with some really great themes for the upcoming months. So you'll be able to engage with some exciting new ways. Tom, anything to share before we go?
Well, just I think we have another event coming up October. This is a little bit down the line, but October 21st. It's an online event, but you have to be a CBOC IO Career Pathfinder member to attend that event. So we might want to encourage people, especially if they're listening on the podcast, to join, to get involved with CBOC.
Check that out, Tom. Yeah, so every month, the third Friday of each month is a IO Career peer group meetup. So all the IO Pathfinder members meet up and talk about all kinds of stuff. Megan Malone leads those. We're also going to start doing momentum sessions, which are going to be once, I think, every 2 weeks for IO. So we've got a lot of interesting things coming and ways to engage, help people with their career paths. How do you break into the field of IO? How do you, if you're in the field of IO and working, how do you increase everything from your brand to upscaling to gaining clients? So lots and lots of fun stuff. And Dr. Ludmila Proslova, thank you so much for being here. And Tom, shall I count us out?
Yes, thank you to everyone. Once again, great conversation. This is the highlight of my week quite often. And with that, Dr. Jeremy, count us out.
Until next time, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.